English translation, 903rd contact, Tuesday, 7th January 2025, 0017 hours.
I am surprised that you are coming so early on a new day again, because that has become unusual. Nevertheless, welcome and greetings, dear friend.
I also greet you, Edward, my friend. There is a reason why I come here so early. And that is that my thoughts have been occupied with the fact that, as a result of the block on your retrieving our conversations, no more conversation reports can be written. That is very unfortunate. And I thought about it, and came up with the solution that I could photocopy some of my grandfather Sfath's notes and explanations, which he had written down verbatim in his legacy and mainly in the annals. I had the idea that I could read the recorded material to you directly, and you could write down what I said at the same time. I have already tried this once, with regard to a punishment imposed on you by your teacher, because during a nature study lesson, you had expressed your negation of the idea that God was the creator of nature. The punishment imposed on you by Teacher Frey for this. He was a religious believer of the same sect as Mrs., who conspired against you with the teacher, ordered that you should apologize to God and correct the fact that it was really He who created nature. But you did exactly the opposite and wrote a longer article as a punishment assignment, which my grandfather copied for himself so that I could also copy it. I consider it to be remarkably very good and also judge it in this way. My grandfather added a comment to your punishment work at the time, saying that you were beaten half to death by your teacher for your work, because it was written in such a way as to go against his cult beliefs.
I can remember that. It was a punishment, for which I was given 3 days to write a confession to God, and to admit that I would never again say that God is not the creator of nature and of everything. But I did not do that. Instead, I wrote the opposite, the truth, about how creation really is, etc. I then handed it in to the teacher, who waited to see me after the lesson and when all the students had left. He then took me aside and read my punishment assignment. His face turned bright red, then redder and redder, and suddenly he started shouting and beat and punched me with his fists until I lost consciousness. I do not know what happened next, because when I came to, I was lying on the ground and there were no human beings around. It was also already getting dark outside. So I picked myself up and went home, where I only told my mother that I had to stay after school at school.
You should write all of this down, also what you wrote as a punishment at the time. This would be particularly valuable because it is very instructive.
You know that I cannot recall and write anything down because our lion has blocked everything, and besides, I do not even know if our conversations are still being recorded since the blockade. Arlian did not say anything about that.
There is no hindrance in that regard, because the block is only effective when you want to retrieve information. Consequently, I could scan the recordings of our conversations and then dictate them to you. However, what my grandfather recorded is in our language, so I would have to translate everything into your mother tongue.
That is quite tedious, as I explained to you and Bermunda about a month ago. It simply takes much more time than if I could access everything and write it down immediately. And what Sfath said and explained would be quite interesting. And if you could bring me some of it and dictate it, I would be happy to write it down, even if it takes a lot of time.
I can do that, but then I have to translate his notes into your mother tongue on an ongoing basis, because what my grandfather wrote down and wrote is invariably in our Plejaren language.
Yes, I know that because Sfath told me that, but what he had from me was in German, as was my punishment.
That is correct, but it will still take some time for me to dictate to you what I have scanned from his notes in this regard, and which you can then probably use as well if you want to.
Yes, since I still know more or less what I did at the time. I think at the moment that I might be able to use this as an introduction to my new book. We will see. I also think that you recorded what we have now spoken together, so you can dictate it to me and I can write it down.
Unfortunately, that is not the case, So I have to retrieve it and then dictate it to you, and you have to present it to me later. What I can do now regarding your school days is to read from my copy and dictate what I have here today and what follows. What I have to say about an alleged God.
About the being of creation and its energy and power, plus its effect in all its 7 universes of 7 dimensions in the entire space of creation. About the existence in life of all existence of fauna and flora, as well as about the behavior of human beings and their way of life and conduct. According to the teachings of Nokodemion from the neighbouring universe and the teachings of Sfath, the wise teacher from the very distant Plejaren stars in the neighbouring universe, learned and reproduced by me in self-decision, self-reflection, and in acceptance different perspectives and in an empathetic way, in accordance with one's own good social behavior and for the purpose of teaching, counseling and giving advice regarding life issues, and also the all-invigorating energy of creation, in terms of the work and the entire career in accordance with the teaching of Nokodemion. The human being's own thinking is very important to him, so he should not have a religious or secular belief. Not a religious, secular, or any other definable or indefinable belief, but the independent thinking of the human being leads him to a true and contented life, and thus to his comprehensive mental health, as well as to true love and peace, and to freedom within himself and with his fellow human beings. First, I have the following to say. Questions that are only marginally related to the teaching of creation energy should not be pursued further, and consequently should also not be studied, because dealing with these topics contributes nothing to evolution towards true humanity. Evolution actually means a slow, seamless, and progressive development of large or large-scale connections, or a gradual development towards higher forms of life, in this case towards the evolution of knowledge in human beings. In other words, evolution is about gaining strength through learning and applying knowledge to evolve in all areas in which human beings are active and use the knowledge they have learned extensively. On the one hand, to become truer human beings, and on the other hand, to offer creation, or rather, all-encompassing nature in its entire existence, as well as its energy and power that is effective throughout the universe, everything that is needed to maintain, appreciate, honor, and promote it as it deserves. In this, the emphasis is on act in reality and truth, and not on mere theoretical knowledge that cannot be applied in any way and is of no effective use, which is why theory is not evolutionary and inapplicable, but only creates an understanding that helps human beings when they need it to help them visualize their world, their lives, and their meaning. Consequently, theoretical topics are in no way directly conducive to evolution. On the contrary, they distract from conscious evolution because they seduce many human beings into dealing with a topic that does not help them in their personal lives. Rebirth is only an appearance. First of all, the so-called rebirth should be mentioned and used to clarify that it does not exist at all, and also cannot exist because the form of the energy of creation is a form that is, so to speak, a particle of the energy and power of creation. This energy with its existing power cannot become flesh, and therefore cannot be reborn as a human being, because as an ever-existing creative life energy, it is absolutely pure energy with great power, and therefore not material like the human body, which it animates and which is transient, dissolves, decays, and perishes when the creation life energy escapes from it and it becomes lifeless or is then dead. As pure energy and power, it cannot be reborn, but it is given to it, like every kind and form of energy, that it can continue to have an effect in another foreign body in the form of consciousness, object, apparatus, etc. The form of the energy of creation that gives life to the consciousness of a human being in terms of the energy of creation, and thus also to the corresponding personality, like every animal or other life form, according to its genus and species, unites itself immediately after leaving the consciousness, With that absolutely appropriate level of creation energy in the realm of the countless, and the levels of creation energy assigned only to the respective classes or types of beings, which are given in the universe or in the creation area. This is to completely process all the countless experiences of knowledge accumulated in their previous existence over a longer or shorter period of time. In this regard, everything that has arisen in the consciousness of the personality or the human being during the existence and consciousness, in the same way as in animals, creatures, or other life forms. In this sense of the true truth and understanding, the creation life energy, when it is at rest, processes the knowledge experiences that it has acquired in processes at the creation energy level. The acquired knowledge and experience of the previous existence as consciousness in a material body animated by it, of a new personality or a human being, for example, or an animal, creatures, or other life forms that also exhibit some kind of consciousness, but each according to their genus or species, is thus processed and then stored in the creation energy for all of eternity, thereby evolving it. In turn, the next new personality benefits from this, being animated by the further evolved energy of creation and the consciousness within it becoming more advanced and further developed. After a longer or shorter period of time, when all knowledge experience has been processed, a consciousness and thus a new personality is revived, which is conceived as a human being by human beings, by man and woman. This is what happens when a sperm cell from a man fertilizes an egg cell from a woman. Normally, this fertilization takes place in the fallopian tube. Provided that a healthy egg cell is released from the ovary, that is, that ovulation occurs in this way, and that the egg cell is actually picked up by the fallopian tube. A few days after conception, a so-called yolk sac first develops, after which, after a certain time in the female womb, the embryo develops naturally in the course of the developmental stage and lies within the amniotic sac laterally under the uterine lining. Most of the internal organs and external body structures also develop there. This natural process develops before all time, before the actual life. The creative life energy moves into the embryo, which occurs on the 21st day after conception or fertilization of an egg. When the creative life energy moves into the embryo on the 21st day after conception, an energy impulse occurs that immediately leads to independent life, through which the new consciousness is also awakened. After that, actual life begins in the womb, causing the embryo to grow and become larger. And thus the so-called embryonic stage begins, which lasts about 8 weeks, during which the embryo develops into a fetus, which occurs about 10 weeks after fertilization. Then, as a rule, after 9 months from fertilization, the birth of the fetus that has developed into a baby occurs. After birth, this baby grows up and becomes an adult human being, who is supplied with the creation life energy throughout his entire development and lifespan until he dies, and thus until the moment of his death, and thus before the decay and dissolution of the material body. What is to be understood? The evolutionary task of human beings, as materialized forms of the life energy of creation, is to build themselves up in all good things in such a way that all the power of the impulse of life is able to build and assert itself ever better and stronger, which, however, is only possible if the human being, through unconscious thoughts and logical actions, which he has to learn in its entirety, and through which he becomes aware of what life means and how he should live it, so that he can manifest and grow the power of creation energy in his daily life. But for this, no theory is appropriate or necessary, because as a rule, such a thing only leads to confusion and a confusing swimming in problems, which pushes logical solutions aside. Even if theories seem to be interesting and tempting, they do not lead to logical solutions, but prevent them, and consequently they cannot be implemented in practice either. This is especially true when it comes to learning to become a real human being. This requires a great deal of understanding, tolerance, and neutrality towards oneself, as well as enjoyment of all the work to be done, and also a willingness to help and be generous. This is also necessary with regard to working together with fellow human beings, where empathy and forbearance are also required, as are loyalty, love, integrity, and joy, etc. These values, as well as many other behavioral values, are the practical topics of the teaching of Nokodemion, which is the teaching of truth, teaching of creation energy, teaching of life, which is to be learned by the human beings of Earth and to be dealt with, and thereby grow within oneself in order to become a true human being and thus honor and respect creation. What the creation really is. The creation is not a religiously conceived imaginary God, and is therefore also not a great or small being that is somehow human, human-like, divine, determining, directing or guiding all events of all kinds and implementing them or having them implemented by human beings, etc. Creation is not a vis in a being of religion, a word that is etymologically highly controversial and whose meaning is not clearly defined. Even in ancient times, the word religio was used to mean to bind back, while on the other hand, the term religion is derived from the Latin religare, which is supposed to mean to bind or to tie. Marcus Tullius Cicero, the eldest son of a Roman knight, however, interpreted religare as to read something again and also as to reconsider. Note, the name comes from the Latin term cicer, which means chickpea. Cicero was the most famous orator in ancient Rome, but he was also a lawyer, politician, philosopher, and writer, who was also referred to as an upstart because he was the first of his kin to hold the office of consul and was therefore referred to as homo novus, which also means new human being. That was in the year 63 before Emmanuel, or Cursor, when Cicero held the consulate. He was the highest magistrate of the Roman Republic and had far-reaching power, which he was also able to use to crush the attempted coup by Senator Lucius Sergius Catilina, who tried to seize the might of the Roman Republic through conspiracy. Cicero was then honored by the Senate as the father of the fatherland for crushing the coup attempt. The creation is therefore not an imaginary vis in equals being, that is to be worshipped, but simply to be respected in dignity and honor. It is not what deluded believers erroneously call God, and as such a fantasy figure is to be worshipped. This, as in Christianity, an alleged Son of God named Jesus Christ, who is said to be a Son of God and as a result of the lying and fraudulent claims of deluded believers, should also not be worshipped or reverently adored. This is also not the case with other gods that are worshipped as a boma or gods through religious belief and sectarian belief or other deluded belief in a god. The creation is neither commanding, demanding, nor begging, because in truth the creation is completely neutral in reality and truth in its entire creation space, encompassing 7 universes, which is given in 7 different main dimensions in the same space, so that in the entire cosmos material belt, with its energy and power, it encompasses allowing nature, fauna and flora of all genera and species on all planets and moons of the 7 universes that carry open faunal and floral life to simply live, evolve, change, mutate, unfold, and work in myriad ways, as it was created and predetermined in a completely and emphatically neutral way in primeval times. Altogether in its myriad forms, it is completely incomprehensible to human intelligentum, as well as to its mind, no matter how highly, widely, and knowledgeably developed it may be. This also applies to all other existing things in the entire cosmos, or the material belt. All suns, planets, asteroids, comets, the stardust, and the universe. in which, fundamentally, in the soup formed electrons, neutrons and protons, which over time and duration developed into ionized deuterium atoms and hydrogen atoms, which in turn resulted in helium through their fusion, etc. Before all this happened, there was only the nihilo, the nothing, or rather the eternal, timeless, endless nothing. Before it happened, which is inexplicable to humans, that through impulses from the nihilo, a becoming or an existence of the forms of absolutum, whereby a total of 7 forms of absolutum or absolutum universes or absolutum levels emerge, which can be described as follows. Forms of absolutum are absolutum universes or absolutum creations or absolutum levels, of which there are ranging from the highest to the lowest, namely as follows. 1. Being absolutum. 2. Sohar absolutum. 3. Super absolutum. Getting Sushang 4. Creation absolutum. 5. Central absolutum. 6. Absolutum. 7. Absolutes absolutum from the lowest absolutum form. Absolutes absolutum emerge the first in sevenfold in each in itself sevenfold dimensioned 49 simple creations or universes, whereby these lowest forms of creation, that is to say universes, each have 7 belts, of which the 4th corresponds to the material belt or the cosmos, which is generally known to human beings as the visible universe with all its galaxies, nebulae, meteors, suns, planets, and moons, as well as all the stardust, solar winds, and space particles, etc. This, while the remaining 6 belts consist of pure creation energy and of different forms of energy. All absolutum creations and/or absolutum universes and/or all absolutum forms and/or absolutum levels and/or all absolutum pure creation energy levels were created only once through the being, absolutum and/or through the increation, which was created in its permanent being primal energy and permanent being primal power by the nihilo, which exists in the endless duration of the endlessness of space, but which remains incomprehensible to the human being of Earth in every wise. Since the forms of the absolutum 2 to 7 have emerged since their primal creation, respectively, since their becoming of their existence through the being absolutum, which itself has emerged, out of the impulse of the nihilo, no further forms of the absolutum have been created by the being absolutum. Of all the 7 forms of the absolutum, since its coming existence, only the lowest absolute's absolutum has created and continues to create the simplest and lowest of universe forms, which are capable of to produce energy and power as well as substances for coarse material, matter and volume resistant and form unstable liquid aggregate states, as well as for independent life in organisms and thus life. Thus, the conditions were given for the material belt, the 4th belt of solid matter or the cosmos in all 7 universes, which are all together called creation and exist in the same creation space, but which are separated by 7 main dimensions, whereby, however, each planet or moon, etc., each cosmos in each universe has its own and innumerable dimensions of the past and future. In each of the 7 universes, a cosmos is created, or rather, a material universe belt. In this wise, the absolute absolutum created a unique multiple creation of 49 simple or lower universes or creations, universal consciousness as its first work, in order to create only single universes or twin universes of a lower form in the following. These lower universes or forms of creation evolve independently up to the creation, in order to then become the central creation, but as in further development in 1049 full form, further after countless myriads of years, to higher developing forms of creation or universes, until a fusion with the absolute absolutum takes place. The lowest universe or the lowest form of creation, for example, the universe known to Earth humans, which the Plejaren call the Dern universe, and which has a sister universe, the Dal universe, as it is called by the Plejaren of the Ankar universe, That is to say, this form of universe is the only one in countless forms of the given, which in its vastness, encompassing 7 belts, has a material belt. The cosmos is a 4th belt. In this, gases, electrons, neutrons, and protons, etc. are formed, as well as all 280 elements, of which only about 120 were known to earthly science by the year 2000, after which the relevant research by Earth humans took a long time into the current period of the 20th century and beyond, until the number of 280 elements remained unresearched. Just as the dimensions of the creation are given in all 7 universes of creation, so that the values are equally valid in all cosmoses and galaxies and influence everything, so these are also given in all nebula, suns, black holes, matter clouds, neutrino clouds, sunbeams, in stardust and in space particles, as well as in all the many planets, moons, comets, meteors and asteroids, etc., and ultimately also in all the tiniest and largest life forms, and are decisively influential for the development and evolution of everything and everyone. In the inevitable change from time and endless duration, the lowest creations of universes or creations change into primeval universes or primeval creations. As it then continues, and then, when they have developed in this way, merge with the absolute absolutum. As part of this, it then participates in creating new self-acting creation energetic impulses, which, designated as URED, enable the creation of a new lowest universe or a new creation. These very fine creation energetic impulses, URED, develop independently out of the absolute's absolutum. The next form of creation to arise from this develops again in its expansion through evolution. So in the course of the duration of myriads of years from the lowest form of creation, whereby the same development takes place again as has occurred previously. Consequently, a new energy and power, a new universe or a new creation with a coarse material belt, with galaxies and stars, that is to say suns, as well as planets, comets, and asteroids, etc., as on planets and moons, etc., fauna and flora, and ultimately, according to possible conditions, coarse material life forms are created. Thus, the next new creation is created, full of energy and power, which is purely created in terms of creation energy, but which human beings on Earth merely call nature, which, however, is the totality of everything and everyone in the creation, is given in all 7 creation universes, whereby the holistic nature of nature and all its energy and power, and thus the true existence is the all-encompassing creation. Repeating what absolutum forms and creation forms are, as well as their meaning, development and importance, all absolutum creations, that is to say absolutum, universes, that is to say, absolutum forms, that is to say absolutum levels, were aligned by the nihilo in such a way that effectively once the 6 other lower absolutum forms were created by the continuous being absolutum, primal energy and continuous being primal force of the being absolutum. This is how everything emerged from the nothing vacuum of nihilo in a completely impulse-arousing wise, through the so-called or Urknall, as the human being calls the primal beginning of the origin of the universe or creation, in a completely impulse-arousing wise out of the nothing vacuum of nihilo. Except for the being absolutum form, which was created out of the nihilo as the primal beginning, no other absolutum form of this kind has found existence as absolutum creation, universal consciousness, since its primal becoming. Of all the 7 forms of the absolutum that were created, only the being absolute absolutum, universal consciousness of creation, was the first to be created by impulse. The other 6 and lower forms of absolutum were created by the being absolutum, whereby only the lowest form of absolutum, the absolute absolutum, creates the simplest and lowest form of creation, or the lowest form of universe that has a coarse material universe belt, a cosmos. In this wise, the absolute absolutum creates that which can be understood by Earth humans as the primordial creator of the known universe. It also creates what the simple creation constantly produces as a low-level universe, which on the one hand has a material belt or a cosmos, and thus a visible universe. But this is only erroneously assumed and understood by Earth humans as universe, because they imagine the cosmos to be the entire universe. However, he has neither an idea nor the effective knowledge that the universe has 7 equally large belts, of which the fourth is the visible cosmos with all its material structures, while in front of it are 3 and behind it 3 further belts of pure energy. And that the sevenfold is given as universes which are interwoven in the entire space of creation in their own main dimensions and do not touch each other is quite unknown to Earth humans. The lower forms of creation, God of the absolute absolutum, evolve in the course of endless duration for Earth humans to understand in myriads of years, again up to the creating creation. Thus to the absolute absolutum, in order then to evolve in the course of duration to the central consciousness of creation and to the being absolutum. However, before this can happen, there must be further development through the lowest form of creation before it is possible to reach the highest level of the be absolutum, whereby only the 1049th stage of evolution ends in fusion with the absolute absolutum. For Earth humans, the lowest universe or the lowest form of creation is to be understood as the Dern universe, in which they live and exist in the SOL system on planet Earth, in the Milky Way galaxy of the visible cosmos. Mankind on Earth exists in this Dern universe, so called by the Plejaren from the Ankar universe. This universe, that is to say the creation, which in its vastness encompassing 7 belts, shows a material belt or cosmos, in which gases, electrons, and all 280 elements are found, which are in all galaxies and nebulae, suns, black holes, matter clouds, neutrino clouds, etc., as well as in planets, moons, comets, meteors, etc., and ultimately in the tiniest and largest life forms, ensures, among other things, that life can exist at all. If, over time, the lowest forms of creation or the lowest forms of the universe change as a result of their many myriad year evolution into the form of the absolute absolutum, then these create through creation energetic swinging waves impulses, which are referred to as the idea, which then contribute to the recreation of one or more lowest universes / creations, which consequently develop independently out of the impulses or the idea. The next form of creation in the expansion through evolution, from the lowest form of creation, then no longer exhibits a coarse material belt with galaxies and stars, as well as coarse material life forms, because the next stage of evolution is already only in the form of pure creation energy. And what is still to be explained with regard to the idea, it is not an actual idea, but solely and exclusively very powerful, creation-capable, creation-energetic vibrational impulses. Nature in all its existence, energy and power are, throughout the universe, the creation known to the human beings of the earth, which is integrated and existing or pulsating with life in the whole and in everything throughout the universe, and in all comprehensive existence and life. This, whereby everything in the fourth of the 7 belts of the universe, in the material belt or cosmos, can be visibly perceived by Earth humans. In all 7 contained universes of creation, these are differently dimensioned, and in these 7 universes the same creational energy and power is at work. Although all 7 universes are separated in terms of dimension, and thus the creation in itself and in the same space consists of 7 different universes in 7 main dimensions, through which, however, all 7 are different and separate from each other and do not touch each other.
Sunday, 6th of February, 1949. Ed. Meier, Niederflax, 1253, Ulach.
Note: the rest of the conversation between Billy and Quetzal was of a purely private nature.
Sprinkles from the Correspondence 9, by Bernadette Brand.
It is not always direct questions that end up in my mail folder, but sometimes also arguments such as the one below, which corrects a fundamental mistake that unfortunately went through the proverbial cracks and therefore appeared in the December WZ. This time, as an exception, I will not anonymize the name, since it is clear anyway who the author of the article in question is. For further questions that I was asked regarding multiple births, however, I needed a special lesson in creation energy teaching from Billy, because I was not quite sure how things stood in this particular case, or whether I had understood and deduced everything correctly.
Question. In the last issue of The Voice of the Age of Aquarius, December 2024, number 213, an article by Achim Wolf was published, page 3, titled, "There is neither fear nor anxiety in me." Achim's view in the article does not seem coherent to me. From my point of view, exactly the opposite is correct than what he ultimately wants to have recognized and describes as the correct conclusion. Here I quote the first paragraph of his article and the following 3 sentences. Quote, "This sentence from Billy's book, Meditation from a Clear Viewpoint, seemed paradoxical and absurd to me for a long time because I had not thought hard enough about what exactly it meant. The human being cannot claim never to have felt fear or been afraid of something in his life, I thought to myself. And if this sentence is to be internalized in a meditative way, but is illogical, then this must lead to an aversion in the consciousness and in the psyche. Because the subconscious mind always thinks only logically and must rebel against this contradiction, so my seemingly logical conclusions. However, I started from the wrong assumptions. It was only later that I realized that it depends on what is in me. It does not refer to the mental block with consciousness, subconsciousness, the respective superordinate unconscious forms and the psyche, that is to say, not the inside of the human being. Rather, it can only refer to the innermost part, the finest material, the pure spiritual, the pure creation energetic, the creation energy in the human being. End of quote. Argument. Here is my view on this. I take the opposite view, that the inside of the human being is meant and should also be addressed with this sentence, and not the innermost part of the human being, which remains inviolable either way. My reasons for this. It is correct that human beings are repeatedly exposed to fear and anxiety in life. On the one hand, consciously, especially in the case of acute danger, or on the other hand also only subliminally and unconsciously, whereby the right, progressive action can be inhibited, etc., etc. But just because something unpleasant and negative arises in the behavior of a human being, and he now concentrates on pronouncing a sentence in the "it is so" form in order to contain precisely that which is unpleasant and negative, is not illogical, but logical, correct, and constructive. It leads just as little to an aversion in consciousness as it also leads to no aversion in consciousness when a smoker wants to stop smoking, and now speaks in the "it is so" form, "I do not smoke." The "it is so" statements refer to the present, and one will probably be able to influence this positively. However, what can be positively influenced is always the consciousness, the subconscious, the psyche, etc., that is to say, the mental block, and thus the inner self of the human being. But the inmost self can never be influenced, because it can only indirectly absorb neutral impulses, and also release them, so that the subconscious can take up these impulses and the same can then penetrate into consciousness, or not. Of course, negative behaviors do not disappear overnight. So if the human being also has fear and anxiety here and there in the future, but with this sentence, the fear and anxiety, especially the underlying everyday fear and anxiety, is contained, then this sentence has already fulfilled a positive purpose. Akim and I therefore come to exactly the opposite conclusions with regard to whether the inner self or the inmost self of the human being should be addressed. What do you think?
Answer: yes, your argument is absolutely correct, logical and conclusive. In many places in the creation energy teaching, it is stated very clearly that the innermost part of a human being cannot be addressed or influenced, neither by direct thoughts nor by meditation, meditative contemplation or commands, desires, feelings, ideas, imaginations or illusions. The innermost self of the human being, or, in short, the innermost, which is of a subtle material nature, corresponds to nothing other than the effective energy of creation. And this cannot be addressed or influenced directly in any wise or by anything, as we have learned from numerous statements and thorough explanations by Billy. The creation life energy is our actual life impulse, and this is protected from any deliberate influence by the censor, which works independently and cannot be influenced and only allows strictly logical evolutive impulses to pass into the realm of the innermost self, where these are merely stored and only processed after the death of the human being. With regard to the logic of the censor, it should be noted that it works purely evolutively under very special, absolutely logical aspects and is therefore aligned to an increase in the overall evolution and thus the power of our creative life energy, which presupposes completely different conditions and facts than we human beings generally understand and mentally comprehend. The desire to influence our innermost self, or the wish to evolve as quickly as possible, is connected with the secret intention or the underlying desire and aspiration to ascend into higher evolutionary spheres ourselves. However, this is characterized by a profound lack of understanding of what evolution actually is, and what place is assigned to human beings in the overall evolution of the entire creational and creative process. The creational itself, nature with all its countless diverse aspects, forms of appearance and expressions, knows no hierarchy of the spiritual, as esotericism claims, and with this false, the creative itself, nature with all its countless diverse aspects, as esotericism claims, poisoning and obscuring human thinking with this false and confused image, from which then arise the ideas that it is possible for human beings to directly influence and push their evolution in the life energy of creation. The noblest task of the human being, that which was assigned to him by creation, is to become Amadan, that is a law fulfiller and thus a truly human being. That is the only endeavor he should follow, because by striving for true humanity, he not only fulfills his task given by creation, but also indirectly, but very efficiently, evolves the growth and the gain of strength of his impulse of creation life energy, which after the death of the human being creates an absolutely new, neutral, independent personality that cannot be influenced by the human being and his desires.
Question. A question about the creation life energy that animates the fetus from the 21st day. I have twins who are both very intelligent. In particular, both have very pronounced logical mathematical intelligence, intelligentum. Hence the question, is the type of creation life energy the same for twins? Or how can it be that both are so intelligent and not just one of them? Then another question. I understand that one does not inherit intelligence, intelligentum, from one's parents. Only in rare cases is this the case. Is intelligence and intelligentum then exclusively connected to the memory banks?
Answer. When, on the 21st day after the conception of a new human being, or several, such as twins, triplets or other multiples, the development of the embryo is so far complete through the formation of the heart that the previously dependent egg cell cluster is no longer built up and allowed to grow by the mother organ alone, but rather becomes capable of independent development and an independent life. An impulse from the growing fruit on the 21st day after conception triggers an invigorating impulse of creative life energy from the enormous mass of creative energy that is destined to invigorate human life and supply it with energy. In the case of multiple births, each embryo sends out its own impulse and is then animated by its own absolutely independent neutral impulse of creation life energy, which differs from that of its siblings, which also causes the heartbeat to begin. From about the 9th week of pregnancy, when all the internal organs are fully formed, the embryo is then called the fetus. What these impulses of the creation life energy are is determined solely and exclusively by the enormous mass of the creation life energy, which in turn follows the planned evolution of creation itself, which knows no coincidences, but only a destiny that determines the development of everything that exists at all according to its own evolutionary laws, and thus also the extent to which the life impulses for multiple births differ. These differences between multiple siblings can be very slight, so that they appear almost identical to the observer when they meet these human beings after their birth or during their independent lives. However, they can also differ noticeably, obviously, or even crassly from one another, which can then lead to obvious and sometimes significant differences in personality and character between the siblings. Whether differences in personality occur and how strongly they differ from each other is determined, as already mentioned, solely by the pool of creation energies, which follows its own creational laws, which remain incomprehensible to human beings throughout their development and evolution, because he can neither intellectually nor emotionally move in the spheres of the purely creational or think his way into them, which is always impossible for him as a human being at every stage of development, even at the highest, and will always remain a mystery to him. These differences, however, relate exclusively to character, intelligentum, and personality, but not to the physical appearance, which is determined by genetic, that is, material factors, and whether the person is an identical or multiple. Identical twins are genetically almost identical. Since they come from the same ovum and sperm cell, and the embryonic cells divided at a very early stage between the 3rd and 12th day, and developed individually. For this reason, identical twins have the same DNA, and thus usually also the same sex. In rare cases, however, identical twins are of different sexes because a fertilized egg cell with the sex chromosomes XY can give rise to a cell with a cell nucleus that has not received a Y chromosome during the subsequent fissioning. Multiples arise from several ovaries that have matured at the same time, which is abnormally encouraged by artificial insemination, and are fertilized by different sperm at the same time. In these cases, the similarity between the multiples is not much greater than between normal siblings, since such multiples already have different genetic structures at the moment of conception. The fundamental personality that every newborn multiple child brings with them is always neutral, completely individual and special, and always differs in nature and expression from that of their siblings, even if these differences are sometimes barely perceptible. The only thing that causes multiple siblings to often resemble each other in their interests, actions, reactions, and behavior is what they are taught as a result of their upbringing, unless their personalities are actually extremely similar, which can lead to identical or very similar life courses if multiple siblings are raised separately in different families. The intelligentum is always part of the personality and is connected to the knowledge stored in the memory banks, which is why it is in no way inheritable or transferable, not even in exceptional cases. What can be inherited are only physical characteristics and susceptibility to disease, which are transmitted genetically, but not character and intelligentum, which are determined solely by the independent personality that the impulse of the creative life energy brings with it on the 21st day. The intelligence of a human being, on the other hand, which he develops in the course of life and builds up and expands through his learning, is only transferable through the mother, who transfers her willingness to learn, her interest, her openness and receptiveness to the fruit that grows inside her, and which she gives birth to as a newborn child at the end of the pregnancy. Intelligence is not and in no wise genetically determined or genetically provable, as is the case, for example, with heredity, in which certain genes of the parents are passed on to the children, which then manifest themselves in some form materially or physically. This does not exclude the possibility that during the development of the child during pregnancy, genetic changes or genetic damage can occur, which are caused, for example, by environmental influences or a freak of nature, and which, in the worst case, can lead to perfectly healthy parents giving birth to physically impaired or damaged and even malformed children.